Hello and welcome to the Elder Tree podcast. My name is Twiggy Dawn. I'm the founder of the Elder Tree and Alchemilla Herbals, and I reside on Jitterbug land here in far north Queensland. You are listening to the Herbal Education segment, where each new moon I invite a myriad of plant wisdom keepers to chat about the world of herbal education, about their passions and motivations, and their dreams for the future of herbal medicine education in Australia. This podcast is brought to you by the Elder Tree, a non-for-profit organisation whose mission is putting the medicine in the hands of the people. One of the ways that we are doing this is through this podcast. If you would like to go deeper with the podcast journey while supporting the Elder Tree for as little as $2 per week, then you can become a member of our Patreon. Thanks to all of the people and plants who have helped to make this podcast possible. In today's episode, I interview Benjamin Turale from Temple of Mercury. Benjamin lives on Wudawurung land in Victoria. He is an award-winning alchemist who lives and breathes the Hermetic current. He is the Director of Education in the International Alchemy Guild and is very active in the alchemy community internationally and works to help preserve and pass on the Albertian alchemical lineage. In this interview, Benjamin explores the intricate world of alchemy and its historical significance. He shares the definitions of key terms like alchemy and spagyrics and hermeticism. Benjamin shares his personal journey into the field and the rich lineage of alchemical practices. The discussion delves into the origins of alchemy in ancient Egypt, its evolution through various cultures, and the impact of the Royal College of Physicians on the transition to modern chemistry. The episode culminates in an exploration of the Philosopher's Stone, its symbolic meanings, and the relevance in both historical and contemporary contexts. We explore alchemy's historical roots, the significance of spagyrics, and the transformative processes involved in creating spagyrical medicine. We discuss the importance of fire in alchemical practices, the relationship between alchemy and hermeticism, and Benjamin shares about the potent teachings offered at the Temple of Mercury. Benjamin has a highly intelligent and spiritually deep connection to the path of alchemy, and I know that you're really going to love this one. Hi, Benjamin. Welcome to the Elder Tree podcast. It's so good to have you here today.
Thanks, Tatiana. Thanks very much for having me.
Yeah, it's actually it's a little bit exciting to be having a conversation with you because what we're going to talk about today, the work that you do, is an area that hasn't been discussed on the podcast, and I think that it's a really important part of herbal medicine. And so, yeah, looking forward to discussing some things with you. But before we get into anything too juicy, just for our listeners that might not be familiar with some of the terms and concepts that we're going to be exploring today, I was just wondering if you could do some definitions for us, like starting off with alchemy and spagyrics, and maybe just some kind of key keywords associated to the work that you do that might be helpful for our listeners.
Sure thing. I'll try and be concise and as short as I can, because I can talk about this stuff for probably days if I'm allowed to. So spagyrics is usually the first word that people trip up on. It's usually the first piece of jargonistic lingo. Spagyrics is a word that was coined by an alchemist from the Renaissance called Paracelsus. Paracelsus is quite a famous practitioner. He's known for reintroducing the art of, or not reintroducing, but making popular again, I should say, the medicinal part of alchemy. And so spagyrics comes from two words. It's two Greek words, actually, spau and agirio. So spau means to separate, and agirio means to recombine. So those two words together, to separate, to recombine, that means really the whole process of alchemy. Another phrase which is sometimes used with alchemy is solve et coagula, which is Latin for dissolve and coagulate. So same thing, separate and recombine. There's really another third step in there, which is separate, purify, recombine. So spagyrics is the practice of separating, purifying essential elements within something, and then recombining them together again. And if all of that is done properly, if all those operations are done right, then alchemy is what takes place.
Beautiful. And so plants is one kind of material that's used in alchemy, but there's lots of different kind of materials that are used for making alchemical products.
Yeah, well, so alchemy is an attempt to really understand nature and understand our place in it too. So it's the microcosm and the macrocosm. It's about understanding both, and given that it applies to all of nature, it encompasses all the kingdoms of nature. So we've all heard that old phrase, animal, mineral, vegetable. Um, those are the three kingdoms within alchemy, and um, what we're doing is taking products from any of those kingdoms, animal products, herbal products, or mineral metallic products. We're doing that spagyric process, uh, separating things out into three principles, called the tria prima, which is salt, sulfur, and mercury. Those are three essential elements of any living thing, and we view all those three kingdoms as alive and living. And so you can basically separate these three parts from any kingdom: the salt, the sulfur, and the mercury from any any living thing. Purify them, recombine them back together again, and then what you've got is a product which is the same thing as what you started with, but on a whole new level of being. You've essentially taken something, um, taken it through a death, a rebirth, and an exaltation to a whole new octave. So this is the way that we create products in alchemical work, and produce an exalted product, something that's far better than what we started with.
Incredible. Thank you for sharing all of that. So I'm really curious then. I would love to hear a bit about your journey of becoming an alchemist and yeah, a bit about your education journey and what's led you to this beautiful work that you're doing now.
Mm. Okay, well, I'll try and keep that short as well, as short as I can. Um, I think, like probably a lot of people who are listening, I was drawn to this sort of stuff really from day dot. Uh, as a kid, I think I was probably influenced in some way by my father as well. He was a gold prospector actually, and he did a lot of prospecting actually where I still live now, which is in Victoria on the goldfields, and he found a lot of gold, and uh, that was it was quite indelible actually. Having that experience of holding a raw piece of gold in your hand, and he found a lot. He found two pieces of gold the size of your fist, and that's just an indelible experience. Experiencing gold. You can take gold and throw it into the ocean for 10,000 years and pull it out, and it'll still be perfect. So gold, of course, is both physically and spiritually in alchemy viewed as perfection. It's essentially the most perfect condensation of the work that the sun is doing, which is to coagulate light into matter and create all the forms that we see. So anyway, I'm going off track, but essentially my dad, he was a prospector, and I think that had something to do with it. But you know again, like a lot of people who are listening, when I was a kid, I used to sit in the backyard, mixing potions and playing around, talking to things, and um, got into ritual magic and stuff like that when I was a teenager. And then when I went to university, I did an undergrad in philosophy, and the curriculum was a bit dry. It focused a lot on the Western stuff, but not much of the Eastern stuff. And actually, after my degree, I read the Tao Te Ching, and I was like, oh wow, that seems interesting, and that led me into Buddhism, which led me into meditation. I went a bit crazy with that for a number of years. I guess like a lot of people listening too, it's often, funnily enough, I find in our culture easier to find spiritual teachings from other cultures. You can very easily go to Eastern stuff and learn meditation or qigong like I did, and or even find shamanic traditions, or meditative traditions. Um, but that's the route I took, and then um, after doing that for quite a while, really going quite deep with that, a number of years, I uh, came to sort of want to work a bit more in a grounded way on myself psychologically, and I ended up studying transpersonal psychotherapy. I did years of study in that. Eventually, got my master's, and it was in those studies that we looked at Jung. And for those who don't know, I mean, Jung wrote
Carl
pretty much,
Jung.
yeah, Carl Jung, I should say, the
Hmm.
Swiss psychoanalyst. So he wrote exclusively about alchemy pretty much for the last 10 years of his life, and uh, I was in class, and I can still I've still got the drawing actually, but one of my lecturers handed us all a picture, and it was this picture of a person inside of a flask, and it's really struck me, this image. I was immediately drawn in because I could see there was a layer of meaning there. There's something not apparent but apparent, and uh, I think about a week or two later, I found someone was giving a lecture on an alchemical text called the Splendor Solis, and that's a very old 16th century text. And I went to that lecture, and I was sort of hooked. But that lecturer was, they were sort of again talking about alchemy from this psychological reinterpretation, which Jung was very fond of doing. He never really picked a flask up in his life, and wasn't really taught by any alchemists. He just had his own way of viewing alchemical imagery, which was fine, and it's very useful and cogent in its own way. But it's not what the alchemists of old were doing, which is both spiritual and a physical practice. And then I just went searching for a teacher. I found my first alchemy teacher, which was Dennis William Hock. So I'm still close with him to this day. And then yeah, I found my way into what's called the Frater Albertus lineage of laboratory alchemy. So I can maybe talk more about that later, but essentially he was a man in the 20th century who came out of the Rosicrucian movement, which had been sort of teaching and protecting the alchemical, the Hermetic current for centuries before he started teaching publicly. And so, yeah, that's pretty much how I got here, and I'm still going. And more than 10 to 15 years on, I'm very very deep into it, and it's pretty much my main path now. It's pretty much all it is. All I do. It's all I do with all my time is either practicing or teaching it.
Hmm. Yeah, wonderful. Sounds intriguing. I'd love to hear more about, about your teacher Robert. That, from what I understand, was also a teacher of Saja Popham, which a lot of our
Mm,
listeners would be familiar with. And yeah, just love to learn a bit more about that lineage, but also extending back into, history of alchemy itself a bit more. You touched
mm,
on, Carl Jung's interpretation, but would love to
mm.
know more of, like, yeah, the roots of the lineage that you've learnt from, but then also the roots of alchemy in general.
Yeah, well, yeah, well, so the Frater Albertus lineage, it's sort of he was a Rosicrucian, like I said. He came out of the Rosicrucian society in San Jose in America. And for those who don't know what Rosicrucianism is, it's essentially a form of well, at one time, which is in the Renaissance, Rosicrucianism and alchemy were synonymous practices. The Rosicrucian movement actually, when it first declared itself publicly, um, they posted all of these documents around walls in Paris, and basically saying we're here, we exist, and
Mm.
we're a secret brotherhood and fraternity that um, studies the science of nature. And so after that, a lot of actual societies started up. So what probably started as just a bunch of people who were interested in alchemy and practicing it, eventually coalesced into actual societies. And those societies were maintained from the Renaissance through the Romantic era right up to today. They're still going, a lot of them. And so Frater Albertus, he came out of one of those societies and started teaching alchemy publicly. So he actually broke away from the Rosicrucian movement and started up schools here in Australia. He started one. He started the one in Salt Lake City in the US, and also in Switzerland. And this was in the sort of late 70s, 70s and the 80s, and yeah, so those schools are all closed now, but people who went to them and learnt at them are still around, and one of those people is my teacher, Robert Bartlett. He's still going, and yeah, so I've taught actually with him before, and have his permission to go on and do what I'm doing. So I'm now doing that in Australia. Um, yeah, um, I suppose where that fits in a broader context of alchemy and where it comes from, we really then have to go back to the ancient world, and I'm not sure are we at that point now where we where I launch into another spiel, but are you
Yeah,
with me still?
sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, my understanding's alchemy comes from Egypt, right? So,
Mm.
yeah, it'd be great to kind of know the starting point and a bit of the historical journey of alchemy, if you don't mind sharing.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's a big topic, and again, I'll try and condense it from what's normally at least a 2-hour presentation. But yeah, it does. You're right. It starts in Egypt. Most people will know that the word alchemy literally means from Egypt. So it comes from two Arabic words, al, which means from, and Chem or Kemet, which means Egypt. So that Egypt was called Kemet by the Egyptians. So alchemy means from Egypt. It's the teachings or uh, the mystery school that came from Egypt. And of course, alchemy is also where we get the word chem history from. So the chem in Kemet, it became the chem in chemistry because our modern day chemistry comes out of alchemy. Um, so yeah, we have to really know where it started. I mean, it's probably it's probably really that it started in prehistory, and by that I mean before things started getting written down. We know that within Egypt and ancient Mesopotamia, we've got like a lot of depictions of people doing alchemy. Um, we also know that before things started getting written down, people were practicing it, and that's, I suppose, what makes alchemy fairly standard in terms of an indigenous tradition. You look at most indigenous traditions around the world, they're all oral. Usually, they're oral initiatic traditions. You have to proceed through certain work and prove yourself in certain ways before the next part is shown to you, and it's shown to you piecemeal as you progress. So alchemy was really bound up in these mystery cults in Egypt. Every Say you're in the ancient world and you want to learn alchemy, you'd have to approach a temple. Probably the Temple of Thoth would be a good natural choice, and you'd approach the temple and literally sit outside the courtyard and talk to the priests. And if they admitted you, you'd be let into the inner courtyard where commoners couldn't go, but priests and priestesses could go. Both men and women practice this. And then you'd gradually progress through your initiation into the inner courtyard, progressing finally all the way up to the inner shrine of the temple where the statue of the god was housed. And whilst you progress through these layers, you had access to the temple library. You'd meet every temple had an alchemist, because literally they had to make all these things for the temple. They had to make medicines. They had to insole statues and um, perform rites on them, and you'd be sort of brought into the current that way. Um, but really, it all starts to coalesce, I think, when the Greeks come to Egypt in about, I think it's 334, 332. I usually get that wrong. Um, Alexander comes to Egypt, and Egypt is sort of at the end of its great if we think about really ancient Egypt, it's at the end of its long and grand history. They're fighting a war with the Persians and not having a good time of it. Alexander the Great rocks up with a fantastic army that's battle hardened, and they instill him as pharaoh. And that gives birth to, of course, the last dynasty of Egyptian kings and queens, the Platonic, Ptolemaic, I should say, the Ptolemaic pharaohs. Um, and that's when things start getting written down. So all these texts start getting written, um, like describing all of these processes, because the Greeks come to Egypt and they like to start writing things down.
Mm-hmm.
So the earliest texts we have are attributed really to a man called Ostanes. He was likely, some say he was actually a Persian alchemist who studied in Egypt. But him and a man called Pseudo Democritus there were texts written about these alchemists. Um, we've also got other alchemists, like very famous ones called Maria Prophetissa, Mary the Jewess. So she wrote a text on alchemy as well. She's famous for inventing what we now know as the bain marie. So, when you have food cooked at a function and you've got those long trays that have water in them,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
then they heat the water, and the water bath, the bain marie. Well, the Marie in the bain marie is Maria Prophetissa.
Mm.
She invented that contraption. So she's very famous for a lot of really cool alchemical phrases and riddles. Um, Cleopatra, the alchemist, also. She wasn't Cleopatra the queen, but she just took that name, Cleopatra. She popularized a lot of glassware as well. So they were using glassware at that point in their labs because you could see without touching, rather than, say, using a copper alembic or something like this. They started favoring the glass. And many of those designs for equipment, we still use much the same stuff these days, actually. So time tested. Yeah, and from that Egyptian period, you have many other writers, Zosimus, a lot of codified texts. Towards the tail end of things start to go a bit south in Egypt once the Romans take over. Things are all right for a number of centuries because Rome's pagan. Towards the tail end, Rome becomes Christian, and eventually things get a bit burny. Things start getting burnt, and temples start getting destroyed, culminating in the destruction of the Great Library of Alexandria, which was a storehouse of alchemical texts and all sorts of other texts, and also a school of alchemy. There was an alchemist there called Hypatia, and she was essentially killed by the mobs. But that phase doesn't spell the end of alchemy, because by this point all these ideas have been shooting up and down the Silk Road. People have been coming to study alchemy in Egypt. Many of those earliest Greek philosophers like Plato and Aristotle and all these people, they all went to Egypt and studied by their own admission. So a lot of this Greek wisdom that we're taught is Greek in school. It's not really Greek. It's actually just repackaged Egyptian cosmology,
Mm.
mathematics, all this stuff. Which is not to say the Greeks didn't invent some great things. They did, but they all also studied in these temples in Egypt. So the Hermetic current at that point, or the teachings of Hermes Trismegistus, go from Egypt. Uh, a lot of them flee essentially to Byzantium, because at that point Byzantium is actually a lot more tolerant, even though it's also a Christian part of the Christian Eastern Roman Empire. It's still quite tolerant. So a lot of these magicians and alchemists all flee there, and then you get this period of Byzantine alchemy. Um, that goes on for a number of centuries. I'll speed up here because I've been talking for a while now, but that goes on for a number of centuries, and then the torch gets passed to the Arabs. In about the 8th century, we get a lot of texts starting to get written. There's meant to be a literal transmission of the teachings from actually an Egyptian alchemist who was Christian, went to the Middle East and taught a prince called Prince Khalid ibn Yazid. Um, this Egyptian alchemist was called Morienius. And then we get the Arabic flowering. They have their Renaissance in like the 7th century, while Europe's in the Dark Ages, languishing. As the Hermetic current goes through cultures, it tends to exalt the culture. So you get the Arabs have their centuries of like progress and enlightenment, and then the current comes back into Europe, in the 12th century. You get the Moorish invasions in Spain, bringing all these teachings with them. And then the Crusaders as well. They go to the Holy Land, they encounter Sufi mystics practicing this stuff and who teach them. And really, then, of course, the Renaissance kicks off. And that word Renaissance, of course, means rebirth. And we're all taught it's a rebirth of Greek and Roman learning. Well, that Greek and Roman learning is alchemy, and is really what's underneath all of that. Um, you get the Medici's, famous Italian noble family, translating all these texts into Latin. You get people like Robert of Chester in England translating all these texts into Latin, and yeah, European culture re-experiences alchemy again, and then you get all of this hundreds of years of texts and beautiful imagery and people practicing. Some of the most famous alchemists we probably would have heard of, like Flamel, who's in Disney in Disney movies and Harry Potter and stuff. You get Isaac Newton, uh, also practicing alchemy, an alchemist who did physics in his spare time. Robert Boyle, but you also get a lot of people. People probably haven't heard of practicing alchemy. And finally, from there into the Romantic era, that went into influencing the Romantic era and a lot of people who practiced then, in these secret societies that were created during the Renaissance. Finally, up to the present day, you get those societies preserving the current until it reaches, Frater Albertus and then Robert, and now I'm here explaining it to you. So that's a brief tour, very quick. I've touched on a lot of stuff, but I hope people are still
Mm.
listening.
Yeah, it's amazing actually. It's like it's so interesting tracking that through history, through so many different places. I think there's one part of the piece that really interests me. It's something that we were talking about the other day about what went down in the Royal College of Physicians in London, and
Oh
that
yeah.
kind of, in some ways, the the I want to say the ending of alchemy, but it's not true. But it's more like that, the I suppose where chemistry, modern chemistry steps in. Because I've said for years that I thought that chemistry, a lot of modern science came from alchemy, but it wasn't until
Mm.
speaking with you the other day that was quite validated. And I'm really interested for the listeners to hear what you were talking about with the Royal College of Physicians. Would you share about that?
Yeah, I mean it's a very significant thing for us, in terms of where we're placed in the modern world, in our psyche. Excuse me, and how we view the world. We're sort of all indoctrinated in a way from day dot into this sort of materialistic, atomistic paradigm. This idea that the world is just a giant machine, and if you understand the machine, you can explain everything. That's a very kind of materialistic, reductionistic view of what the world is, and it's very counter to how we see things in alchemy. We see, rather than chemistry giving birth to life, we see it the other way around. Life gives birth to matter. The world is a living thing. Everything actually is alive and conscious at some fundamental level in the alchemical worldview. But we have that view in the modern world because of what happened with the Royal College of Physicians. And when the Royal College was formed, many of the men who sat on that were alchemists. I mean, the Royal College started with alchemy. But at some point, we've actually got a letter between Isaac Newton and Robert Boyle, where Newton is essentially saying to Boyle, because Boyle had been working on a similar path to the Philosopher's Stone that um, Isaac Newton had been doing, and Boyle had published this article and about it, and Isaac Newton read it, and he essentially said to Boyle, like, you should be very careful about what you say, and I'd like to persuade you to high silence if there's any verity or truth in what you're saying. And that sort of really marked this division between sort of the initiatic tradition with alchemy, which is largely secretive, and initiatic, as I said. um, that sort of split off from eventually what started to become chemistry, because Robert Boyle writes a book called The Skeptical Chemist, and that starts chemistry. And it's the beginning of a worldview that says, okay, we're only going to understand everything in terms of matter, in terms of physically trying to describe everything. We're going to remove the operator, as it were, from the equation, which we all know now is a very paradoxical thing to do, because um, you get rid of the observer, you get rid of the universe, essentially, in the equations. So we've now come full circle again with quantum mechanics, where we see that you factor the observer back in, and all these weird things start to happen. But back at that time in the Royal College of Physicians, alchemy starts to become a topic that is repressed and suppressed, in favor of this new way of looking at the world, and it's pushed down, and that's sort of again where alchemy goes underground, and it stays in these secret societies. But in the sort of the public sphere, we get science, which of course is a wonderful thing, and many wonderful things have been done in science. But I guess we're getting to a point now in history where the two are coming back together again, where we have to marry up this idea that um, you can't really create space and time without the observer. Every piece of science that's ever been done has had the involvement of human beings. So it's not something we can get away from anymore, but certainly a wound in the psyche of us Westerners that we have to resolve, and which I see personally resolved in alchemy. I see those opposites married up again. Yeah.
There's something that really stood out to me from what you were sharing there. You mentioned that the Royal College of Physicians, you're referring to a board of men for that college. And
Mm.
am I right to understand that it was a men's led school, a men's led college at a time where probably women weren't really supported in academic learning and being scientists and being in those kind of roles?
Yeah, look, I can't speak to that with certainty, but I would say that that would more than likely be the case. I mean, it's, at a time, I think, when women probably weren't even accepted into university at that time.
Mm.
So,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's just an interesting piece because, when you were talking about the history of alchemy before, you were referring to quite a lot of women's names, like quite a lot of key people in history were women. And so, um, you were talking about Europe kind of going into the dark ages, and, there's a lot that kind of went on. And then, with the patriarchal, I suppose, patriarchy coming in, the church is coming in and being quite a patriarchal movement, and really squishing anything that wasn't Christianity, basically. And so a lot of like the different like magic and mystery and spirituality and anything that didn't align with the church was squashed. And there was the whole burning of the witches and everything around that. And it's just like an interesting giant piece of history that fascinates me, and I don't know a
Mm.
huge amount about it, but it really makes me think about, I feel like there's this really important moment in time with this Royal College of Physicians, and where alchemy just kind of turns into modern chemistry, because it just
Mm.
seems like modern chemistry is really quite soulless from where I sit.
Yeah.
It's like it's meant to be this seeking the mystery, but it's just kind of almost like it's trying to just seek like measurable answers. It's like seeking to just put things in boxes, put a label on it, and go, we know what's happening because we're so smart and now we understand everything. Where it's like so much of the mystery arts for me is almost like there's always got to be that element of the unknown. There's always got to be that magic,
Mm.
the unseen, the immeasurable realms. And um, I was saying to you the
Mm.
other day about a borderline argument I was having with someone about the where science and spirituality, how in my perspective almost they were opposites, and especially chemistry type science, like that level of science. And yeah, it's just really interesting that the I feel like the alchemy, it keeps the science with the spirituality, with the magic, with the unseen realms, with the mystery, and all of that. And so I think,
Mm.
yeah, it's a really important thing, and it's bringing back together the masculine, the feminine
Mm.
elements of science together. So yeah, it's just
Yeah.
definitely an interesting thing to contemplate.
Yeah. Certainly. Yeah. I mean, the early history of alchemy, and those early practitioners. I mean, Alexandria was a very open and free kind of society in many ways. Again, yeah, men and women both practiced in the varying schools, and there were lots of different schools. Actually, it was sort of the combination of Egyptian, Greek, and Jewish schools in Alexandria, all practicing in their own ways. Um, and yeah, I mean, once Christianity took over, it a lot of that just got washed away. But it's also a kind of a nuanced thing as well, because we could kind of hang like a, you know, oh, patriarchy, and all this sort of banging on. But actually, funnily enough, when you get to the Middle Ages in Europe, it's actually the church that preserves alchemy in Europe. So
Hmm.
um, the only people who could read and write at that point were monks. And actually, in the Benedictine monasteries, there are texts that survive while Europe is in this dark age. There are alchemical texts that survive, and they survive because of those monks who preserved it and actually practiced it too. There were a number of Benedictine monks who practiced that as well. So um, it's kind of a nuanced thing, but I'd definitely say that yeah, like Christianity was definitely the death knell. There was also political things tied into it too. So in Egypt, you've got um, Emperor Diocletian makes this edict. He was Christian, basically outlawing gold making um, in the Egyptian temples. So the alchemists were all housed in these Egyptian temples. They could make gold, and so it's said that he outlawed it because really underneath that is these temples would be funding private armies that would be in rebellion against the Roman Empire. So Diocletian makes a very clever move to basically outlaw gold making, because at the same time as he does that, he's saying, well, these temples are now rogue and we can basically destroy them. And all of these ancient temples, which housed all this wisdom and all of this knowledge, just get destroyed.
Mm.
Um, it's very sad, and it really was the end of sort of the golden age of Alexandria and that sort of phase. Really, the end of ancient Egypt at that point, because once the Greek pharaohs die, the pharaonic dynasties die entirely, and that's sort of the end, really sort of the end of the ancient world in many ways. But yeah, certainly right up until you know sort of the middle part, it's all men and it is fairly male dominated
Mm.
up until probably you get into the Romantic era. There are quite a number of female adepts, and actually Rosicrucianism is responsible for a lot of those. Post Reformation, we're talking about the rise of Protestantism. Rosicrucianism was riding that wave. where people are looking at the Catholic Church and going, "Stuff this! We don't want to be paying priests to grant us entry into heaven." So the Protestant church starts up. That also opens the door for a lot of older stuff to start coming through, and all these secret societies to start coming out. And they were actually very equitable. Like, they had a vision of men and women working together, and and that actually goes into Freemasonry, because, believe it or not, early Freemasonry also was dual sex. It wasn't this
Oh.
men only boys club. It was actually men and women. And you also get a lot of female practitioners, famous female adepts of alchemy in that period as well, write a lot of interesting texts. Um, so yeah, you go back to the origins of alchemy. Women are there as much as men are, and in the Romantic period as well, women and men, definitely. So it's really belongs to nobody, and it's the primary birthright of all people and all
Mm.
souls, to find their way back to the source through the work.
Yeah, wonderful.
Mm,
Yeah, something you were talking about before with the gold, and I love as well what you were sharing about with your father being a gold prospector, and you
mm,
were just talking about in Egypt them making gold and that being banned. So my understanding with alchemy is like one of the key goals is the philosopher's stone, right? Like that's what all alchemists are
mm,
kind of reaching towards. That's, you got there if you can make the philosopher's stone. And I always knew there was two elements, but you were talking a bit more to me about it the other day. But there was the actual turning base metals into gold, or uh,
mm,
turning matter into gold. But then there's also the kind of elixir of life or fountain of youth or some kind of
mm.
immortality or life sustaining essence that can be produced. Anyway, I'm saying it in such layman terms, it's probably not even quite right. But could you say
No,
for the
no.
listeners, talk about the philosopher's stone, because it is a term that gets bandied around a bit, and I think it's a good thing to explain.
Yeah, yeah. No, you explained it well, actually. There's basically, so the Philosopher's Stone, again, most people, their reference point for that is probably Harry Potter, but
Hmm.
um, of course J.K. Rowling did a lot of research when she wrote those books. So the Philosopher's Stone is essentially the yeah, like you said, the core pursuit of alchemy, and it does involve having a very special relationship with the unknown and the divine, like you were saying, those more feminine aspects of reality, as much as the practical and the physical. And it's essentially yeah, and this really goes right. This concept goes really right back to the Egyptian period and those early authors. Basically, it's said to be, well, I could simply describe it in one way as it's gold taken to its highest level. It's gold taken beyond the limits that nature can take it. Um, that's one definition of it. Um, Another way to explain it is to sort of talk about it very pragmatically, which is how authors have described it. So, authors always classically describe it usually as a red powder. So, there's actually two forms of the Philosopher's Stone. There's a red powder and a white powder, or a red stone and a white stone. And the Philosopher's Stone is said to have two uses. One use is that because this is a product which has gone through so many of those purification, separation, purification, and then recombination processes, it's now a product which is highly evolved. It's in a way, it's sort of a talisman in and of itself of highly developed evolution. So if you take that stone and you combine it with other materials, it will evolve those materials to a higher level. And that's where we get this idea of lead into gold from. Most people go, oh, alchemy, it's about lead into gold. And that is supposed to be what the Philosopher's Stone is meant to do, or at least one aspect of it is that it can transmute base metals into gold. Now that's to many people a crazy idea, except that really the science, in many ways, you start digging and you go, oh, actually, science kind of backs that up in some ways. So we know, for example, that when you have nuclear degradation, elements basically turn into each other. So they'll basically degrade from one element into another as
Mm.
it as that nuclear transmutation takes place. So Ernest Rutherford discovered this in the 1920s, I think, and he turned to his colleague, said, "Oh, look, it's transmutation." And Rutherford turned to him and said, "Oh, don't say that. They'll think we're alchemists." um, but that's literally what nature does. And I think really what we're talking about here is a kind of low energy, what's called LENR, or low energy nuclear transmutation. Um, it's essentially that if you look at mercury, metallic mercury, it's really only one proton away from gold. If you just add one proton to mercury, you get gold. And you look at many of the famous transmutations in alchemical history, because there's many of them. That's the other problem with this theory that, oh, alchemists, they weren't really turning lead into gold, or this is a stupid idea. Unfortunately, there's many public demonstrations of alchemists turning lead into gold, or some metal into gold. And these people weren't idiots. These metals were then taken to goldsmiths. All the tests were run on them, dissolving them in various acids to test what they were made of, and hammering them and weighing them, and yep, they're gold. Many of these products are still housed in museums in Europe. You can go to these museums and they say, they'll have a coin or a medallion, like, oh, this was transmuted gold. So one idea is that with the stone is that with the red stone you can transmute metals to gold, and with the white stone you can transmute metals to silver, because there's basically red metals and white metals. Red metals are like iron, gold, white metals, silver, tin, things like this. Um, so that's one aspect of the philosopher's stone. The other aspect is it has a medicinal application. So that red and that white stone, if you know what you're doing, if you have the right spagyric operations, you produce a medicinal product. And that product, just as it can evolve metals, it can evolve a human being to its highest state of perfection, which is, of course, spiritual illumination and perfect health. So there's all these preparations within alchemy that, frankly, have been abandoned since the 1600s, sitting in this dusty corner of you know Western medicine that no one's really dusted off until recently. Um, Metallic medicines. I mean, we've got our entire pharmacopoeia. We might say extends from plants, or at least synthesizing a lot of plant compounds artificially. But mineral and metallic medicines haven't really been researched or produced um, en masse like they are now, because there's lots of people like me producing them and selling them and having them tested, and these products are incredible because they you analyze, for example, the essential oil of a plant, and you get all these interesting components like phenols and terpenes and alcohols and esters and all this sort of stuff. And the thing is, you can produce an essential oil with alchemy, with spagyrics, out of a metal or a mineral. And when you analyze that essential oil from a metal or a mineral, it has many of the same components that plants do. Esters, alcohols, all these healing, beneficial components are in essential oils from metals as
Wow.
well. So, and they contain no actual metal. It's just the essential oil that's been pulled out, or catalyzed, I should say. So, it's a fascinating, dusty corner of the Western um, psyche that has been gathering dust. But I and many others feel it's probably a sleeping giant, actually, and
Mhm.
it's probably only a matter of time before big pharma wants to come along and capitalize on it. And
Mm.
there will be all sorts of things that it can cure that currently there are not cures for. So. Anyway,
Wow. It's kind of like we're in the second renaissance right now in a way, aren't we? It's
yeah, yeah, certainly. Yeah, we're in a very free time, and freedom of information is a wonderful thing. I mean, we're kind of in that Aquarian age, aren't we? That everyone spoke of, um, and it can be a bad thing. I think there's almost too much information at times, but um, but yeah, it can also be a really good thing. But when I was a kid, there was like you'd go to the library, you'd never find a book on alchemy. You had to really search. But now you can just hop online. You can find all sorts of information you need to develop and evolve yourself. Mm,
Yeah, wonderful. I'd love to hear more about the spagyrics, just about like your experience with making them, and just for our listeners to understand a little bit more of the nuts and the bolts, because these kind of transmutation processes, that you're talking about, and this whole like pulling things apart and rebinding them back together, it's all very mysterious for most of us, and would love to get a little bit more of an inside view on what that looks like, how you do those kind of processes, and then how that is different to if you are doing like the prima, like if you are working with plants, herbs, like what
mm,
that end product, how that differs from what's currently on the available in terms of like tinctures and percolations, and things like that people are dispensing and utilizing.
yeah. Um, well, I mean, firstly, we'd sort of say as a base concept to all of that in alchemy we say all is one. So all comes from the one thing. As a all that which is above is like that which is below to accomplish the miracles of the one thing. So says the Emerald Tablet, written, as it said, by Hermes Trismegistus, who is an Egyptian alchemist. Um, and what we're essentially doing is taking that one thing, which is the prima materia. So we sort of could think about it like there's this one energy just permeating through everything. You know, uh, Transforming from one form into another. And what we're doing when we start with, let's say, a herb, is we're trying to capture as much of its this universal energy and um, really condense it into a form that can later be consumed. Um, and that first matter, it splits into three parts essentially. So this is coming back to this idea of the tria prima, or the three essentials. We have our salt, our sulfur, and our mercury. So these are three cover terms for these three essential components of anything. So that it might be helpful for your listeners, because I'm sure there's some naturopaths listening out there. And even if I use a more crude metaphor, so right now I'm holding a cup of tea in my hand, and I've got a tea bag, and what I've got in the tea bag are some herbs, and when I put that in water, we've essentially got a basic tincture. Um, Tinct in Latin literally means to color. So when we see the color, we know we've got a tincture. So those herbs have been extracted here, in this case, in the solvent, or in alchemy, we call that a menstruum. So the menstruum here is water. And but we can use other menstruums, of course, with herbs. We use alcohol, is one of the more common ones. Spirits, literally, that's where we get the term spirits from, is from alchemy, because if you take a plant and you ferment it and capture its spirit, um, it will then create alcohol, which we can then concentrate through distillation. That's one of our spagyric processes, is distillation. We can distill the wine, and now we have pure alcohol. So instead of water in this tea bag, with this tea bag, I could use alcohol. And that's basically how a naturopath makes a tincture. They take a herb, they combine it with alcohol or pure spirit, and then once it's extracted, they'll take the herb and throw it away. So that's the first part at which spagyrics and alchemy diverge from what naturopaths do. So whereas the naturopath will throw the herb away, the alchemist will take that herb and do a process called calcination. And so that's where we take the herb and we burn it. So we don't usually burn things when we cook, but in alchemy we like playing with fire. Um, we burn the herb, and what's left over, if we just keep heating it, is a salt. And it will be the salt of that plant. It will contain lots of different medicinal salts in there. So predominantly there'll be potassium carbonate, calcium carbonate. There'll be other things like magnesium and whatever was in the plant, essentially. So we've taken the herb, we've purified it through fire, we've gotten it to a nice white point, white ashes, and then we recombine those ashes with the tincture that we've extracted. So with the liquid alcohol extract, we put those salts back in, and that has a very powerful effect on the tincture, because the salts are alkaline and the tincture is usually a little bit acidic. So what we have there is a kind of a marriage of the sun and the moon. At that point, we have our sun, which is our liquid extract with what we call the sulfur and the mercury in it, and we put our salts, which is our lunar or our moon, and we combine them together. So the acid and the alkaline combine. Um, it catalyzes new compounds actually in the tincture, um, but crucially, it makes the tincture more alkaline. And the effect that that will have when a person drinks that tincture is that when your tongue touches it, it'll send a message to the brain that says, "Oh, this is alkaline, so it's already been digested. So we don't need to break this down." So you drink the tincture, you imbibe it, and it's more bioavailable to the body. And because the salt is in there, the salt is in the tincture, which we also call the body. Um, because the body is married up with the soul and the spirit of the herb, which is salt, sulfur, mercury. Um, the body is like a kind of a base note for the tincture, and it enables the tincture to travel to the tissues of the body as well, to the salts, to our salts. So the tincture becomes more bioavailable, more effective, and there's even additional steps we can do actually to the salts. We can, before we recombine them with the tincture, we could actually take those salts and we could let them deliquesce, which means to just dissolve in the night air. So in springtime, the first matter is traveling around in the air in the form of dew. And that dew is what animates everything and makes it come to life, because that dew is a living spirit. So if we expose those salts to the dew and let it collect the dew, a pretty amazing thing will start to take place, which is we can let the salts dissolve into the dew, and then we can heat them and just keep repeating this process, and eventually those salts will start to reanimate. They'll take on the color of the original plant that we took it from. So like if the plant was green, they'll become green. If it was red, they'll become red. It brings them back to life. So we have that rebirth step again, that alchemy does. And combining those salts back in with the plant um, makes it even more powerful. And then there's lots of other processes we can do. I won't go into too much depth because I'll just confuse everyone. But um, there's many processes we can do to basically separate these three essentials, purify them, and then recombine them. And depending on the way that you separate, purify, and recombine, you'll get different preparations. So one preparation is a tincture, another preparation is an essence, and then another preparation is an elixir. That word elixir is thrown around a lot, but
Mm.
the word elixir actually means from the ashes. So comes from the Arabic word al and ixir. So al again means from. Ixir means ashes. It comes from the Greek word zerion, which means ashes. So an elixir is from the ashes. So
Wow.
an elixir in alchemy is actually a powdered product. It's not a liquid tincture. It's a powdered product. So we've got our tincture, we've got our essence, we've got our elixir. Um, we could also make something called a magistry, or a primum ens. That's another preparation. Finally, the summit of the herbal kingdom is making a stone, a herbal stone. Literally, you make a product out of these three essentials, which turns into a stone. which in and of itself has a lot of wacky properties and powers
Mm.
in and of itself.
Wow. It's amazing. I'm
Yeah,
very curious to see it all happening. So
yeah.
you do this a lot of this is over fire, over flame, right?
It's working with
Um,
heat. I mean, alchemy is often called, philosophers of fire because we're often working with heat.
mm.
So if we're not working with a gentle heat, like in an incubator or with a flask, we're working with literal fire. And these processes, of course, can be applied to all the kingdoms. It's not just herbs. You can do the same thing with animal products and with mineral and metallic products. You can make all these different preparations depending on how you pull things apart and purify them and put them back together.
So would you say that that an alchemist should have their own garden? Like how much of the spagyrical preparations that you make are coming fresh from the garden? How much is using with the prima side of things? How much is using fresh versus dried herb?
Yeah, it's a great question. Because it is really that an alchemist should have their own garden or at least access to herbs, fresh herbs, because for us, when a plant is alive and it's living, it has the third essential principle called mercury. So mercury is essentially the animating force of something. So you know we're alive right now, and because we're alive, we have that animating force. So when a person dies, that animating force leaves them; they become inanimate. And it's that animating force which is also another term for it is spirit or spiritus. Mercury, spirit, animating spirit, they all mean the same thing. um, when plants are living, they have that as well. They have that mercury present in them. So from the moment we pick them, they're dying. And so we want to pick them fresh so that we can capture that mercury in our product, in our final product. It doesn't mean we can't do the spagyric operations on dried plants. We can. We'll get obviously slightly different products, but yeah, like for a lot of preparations, we would use living plants and living herbs because we want to capture that principle. Yeah, just like in a human body. Again, it's this idea that when a person's living, they have the mercury, but when they die, it leaves. In a same kind of way, when you take blood from a dead person, it can't be used in a transfusion. They have to be alive. So, so that's another thing that separates alchemy from science. Is science isn't really focused on trying to capture or um, understand that animating force. That's almost given. It's almost a given in science. It's almost like, oh well, it's just there, but we don't try to understand it really. We're just
Mm.
we're just here to look at chemistry and more simple operations of matter rather than or complex operations of matter rather than trying to understand how is everything alive? How is there this intelligence? That's another word that's often used with mercury. It's the intelligence of something to grow, to for evolution to go in a certain direction. Um, something's driving something. Something is there driving that urge or that impetus. Yeah, so we use living things, and it's similar to in the mineral kingdom. Like there's this idea in mineral alchemy that by the time something gets to a pure element, so a metal, it's considered dead when it's at that point. But when it's a mineral or an ore, so say for example, when a pure element comes combined with other things in the earth, like for example with gold, you'll often find it with things like iron and quartz. And when things are in these mineral states, in their ore states, they're said to be living. Because they're literally still growing, still evolving. But once you isolate them into an elemental form, it's thought that they become alchemically dead at that point. Um, so even in the mineral metallic kingdom, crystals, things that are growing in their structure, still are considered living and alive at
Mm.
some fundamental level.
Well, yeah, I mean, life force isn't something that like modern chemistry can kind of measure so easily with our common contraptions. I'm really curious to know,
No.
because I know that you study like and teach like hermetic science or the hermetic path, and I think like the hermeticism. I'm probably saying it all wrong,
Hmm.
does incorporate alchemy, but also astrology, other areas, magic.
No, that's right.
Um, yeah. So can you tell us a little bit about like
Hmm.
hermeticism? Is that even a word? Am I just making that word up?
No, hermeticism. That's absolutely the right word. Yeah.
Yeah, like as
Yeah.
a distinction from alchemy, or just where alchemy and hermeticism intersect and relate.
That's a great question. Many people often have that question. So, firstly, we could understand the difference or the similarity between alchemy and hermeticism by just looking at the word. So, hermeticism, hermetics, we've got the word herm in there, and the herm comes from Hermes. So, Hermes refers to Hermes Trismegistus. Who was Hermes Trismegistus? Well, he was said to be an Egyptian sage. Uh, we're not sure exactly. He was either a sage, like a real person, a teacher of alchemy, or he's a god. Um, the tricky thing is that in the Egyptian world, so before the Greeks came, their alchemical god was Thoth, Jehudi. Um, when the Greeks come to Egypt, they look at Jehudi, at Thoth, the ibis-headed god, and they say, "Oh, your god Thoth is like our god Hermes." So they're both gods of the underworld. So they ferry souls to the Isle of the Dead. So Thoth will be there at the weighing of the heart ceremony, where in the afterlife your heart is weighed against a feather. He's the one there writing down the account and sort of, you know, you see your life flash before your eyes, and can you come to terms with it, sort of thing. Um, Hermes, he ferries people to Hades. So the Greeks look at Thoth and go, oh yeah, that's the same. Thoth is a god of magic. So is Hermes, uh, god of arithmetic and uh, alchemy, and so the Greeks and the Greeks say your Hermes, your Thoth is our Hermes, and around that time we get Hermes Trismegistus pop up, and really there is a hint that Hermes Trismegistus kind of is like a blend with Thoth, because Hermes Trismegistus's second name, Trismegistus, that means three times. So Trismegistus, three times Megistus. Megistus means great. So three times greatest. Three times greatest is actually an epithet or title for Thoth. So Thoth was actually often called the three times greatest god. Um, so they took that epithet of Thoth and applied it to Hermes. Um, so at that point, we have Hermes Trismegistus emerge, and he's credited with writing a whole bunch of texts. We have the Corpus Hermeticum, and the Corpus Hermeticum is a compilation of three texts, not three texts, many texts, and it's essentially espousing Egyptian cosmology and the Egyptian worldview. And many of those cosmological aspects of how the Egyptians and the Greeks are seeing the world, this creates the cosmology in which alchemy is practiced. So from that point on, alchemy is called the Hermetic current. So uh, the other thing I'll say about Hermes Trismegistus is that uh, he's this author, as I said, of all of these texts called the Corpus Hermeticum, which forms a kind of a collection of texts that are sort of like the Bible of, as it were, Hermeticism and Hermetics. And he's also said to author something called the Emerald Tablet, which is a whole interesting topic in and of itself. But the Emerald Tablet, if you could distill alchemy down to one document, it's in what's called the Emerald Tablet of Hermes Trismegistus. So that's a very short text. It's only 7 paragraphs long, and it's said to outline the whole of the work, the great work to create the Philosopher's Stone. And in that text, towards the end, Hermes Trismegistus says, "Thus have I explained the 3 parts of the wisdom of the whole universe." And so for some, they say that the 3 parts of the wisdom of the whole universe is 3 things. It's alchemy, astrology, and magic. So if you understand those 3 arts, you have a complete view of how everything fits together. Um, so yeah, that's a little bit about the Emerald Tablet. I could also actually just briefly recite it, because I think it's very short, and I think your listeners might appreciate hearing it, because it's full of wisdom, and it's really a core text of alchemy, and a very important document in the Western mystery tradition. So it goes a little bit like this. It goes, "In truth, without deceit, certain and most veritable, that which is below corresponds to that which is above, and that which is above corresponds to that which is below, to accomplish the miracles of the one thing. And just as all things have come from this one thing, by the meditation of one mind, so do all created things originate from this one thing, through transformation. Its father is the sun, its mother is the moon, the wind carries it in its belly, its nurse is the earth. It is the origin of all, the consecration of the universe. Its inherent strength is perfected if it is turned into earth. Separate the earth from fire, the subtle from the gross, gently and with great ingenuity. It rises from earth to heaven and descends again to earth, thereby combining within itself the powers of both the above and the below. Thus will you obtain the glory of the whole universe. All obscurity will be clear to you. This is the greatest force of all powers, because it overcomes every subtle thing and penetrates every solid thing. In this way was the universe created. From this comes many wondrous applications, because this is the pattern. Therefore am I called thrice greatest Hermes Trismegistus, having all 3 parts of the wisdom of the whole universe. Herein have I completely explained the operation of the sun." So that's the Emerald Tablet. It's only 7 paragraphs, but it's said that if you understand it completely, it will explain to you how to transform anything on any level, whether it's mind or matter. Indeed, it's got the instructions for creating the Philosopher's Stone in it, and every procedure that you need to do. So Hermes Trismegistus, yeah, again said to be the author of that, and he mentions the 3 parts of the wisdom of the whole universe, which some people say are alchemy, astrology, and magic. So it's said that if you understand those 3 parts, you can get a full picture of everything that's happening. Um, and yeah, but I like to keep that and recite that to myself from time to time. Most alchemists have a copy of it on their lab wall, just as a sort of like a mantra, and you always return to it. And um, if you memorize it, it actually becomes a part of you, and it can instruct you on what to do. Like many times in my work, I've been stuck, and I go back to the tablet, and it tells me what to do next. So yeah, very special ancient document, and certainly not to be confused with something else called the Emerald Tablets of Thoth the Atlantean, which are very popular online, but they were channeled in the 20th century by somebody totally unrelated to the Hermetic current. But that document we can at least reliably date to 7th century. But it's probably much older. It's probably a product of either the Alexandrian period or beforehand, and it was actually said to be a tablet made of emerald. It was written on an emerald tablet in Phoenician. So yeah. Anyway, that's a little bit about the Emerald Tablet, because it does form sort of the core of both Hermeticism and alchemy. So hopefully I've explained the connection between those two things. It's just that Hermetics refers to Hermes Trismegistus, and he was also an alchemist who wrote texts on alchemy. So that's the connection between the two. The Hermetic current
Wow.
is alchemy. Yeah.
Wow, there's so much in that emerald tablet. It's such a concise, short
Mm,
body of text, but it's yeah, there's so much in it. It's actually really relatable, and there's so much in it as well that for me like rings true across a lot of different cultures and
mm,
religions and kind of First Nations perspectives, and you know, even yeah, interesting with the sun being like the masculine,
mm.
you know, father, and the moon being the
Yeah.
feminine. That's quite cross cultures, and this concept of that we're all one, or that unity, or this, you know, we're all just kind of parts of a greater thing, and that this regeneration, this idea that it's not necessarily like souls die and go to heaven or hell so much as things regenerating. um
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know if that's reincarnation or transmutation or how
Yeah.
whatever kind of happens there, but like there's a sense of there's a lot of mystery in it, and a lot of really acknowledging the necessity for balance, and polar extremes. And
Mm,
yeah, there's so much in that. That's really great. I'm gonna print that out and put that on my wall. And
yeah.
I'm actually really interested to learn more about alchemy now. You really sparked it in me, and so now I really want to tell our listeners about Temple of
Mm,
Mercury, your beautiful alchemy school,
yeah.
and which I am absolutely going to come and learn from you in. So can you, for our listeners, can you share about Temple of Mercury, and how face to face and online, how people can find you?
Yeah, absolutely. So website is thetempleofmercury.com. Um, and yeah, the temple is a physical place. It's a dwelling, sort of separate to where I live. Um, one part we've got the lab, and the other part we have the oratory where all the spiritual work is done. So you put those two together, you get the laboratory. Um, so yeah, Temple of Mercury is a business I've been running for, well, since actually I started it up during COVID. When all the lockdowns were happening, I kind of went deep in my own way and kind of pulled this out. And essentially, it's a continuation of my teacher's lineage and Frater Albertus's lineage. So there's that aspect to it. Um, but I also, in addition to lab alchemy in my classes, I also teach classes on ceremonial magic as well. So traditional ceremonial magic, and um, these two sort of pursuits form part of really the West's indigenous tradition. You know, you were mentioning how the Emerald Tablet has it sort of rings true with a lot of indigenous traditions, and that's no accident because alchemy in and of itself is an indigenous tradition too. So it's that's my purpose in life really is to sort of pass the current on, try and preserve it really as best I can. That's the mission of the Temple of Mercury, to preserve these teachings in their entirety, you know, and I do that, you know, with different levels of classes. So people generally, what you do is you start with herbs, herbal alchemy. Herbs are generally pretty friendly, just in the sense of when you're working with them. You know, if you make a mistake when you're extracting a herb, it's generally not going to kill you. Um, so you start learning with herbs because that's safe, and you learn the basic processes, all the spagyric processes in the lab. And then once you're across that, and generally after a year, you usually wait a year after you've started herbs before you start delving into deeper work with minerals, metals, and animal works, which I also teach classes in. So I've got those classes that are run in person, and that's here in Victoria on the Goldfields. I've also got an online herbal program for people who can't make it in person. Um, you know, you can do that. You can do it online, and it's got video demonstrations of everything and lectures to sort of get you through all the content. Um, yeah. So I've got my work there, and yeah, just the purpose of it, as I said, it's just to preserve the Hermetic current, because it's an ancient current, and Hermes is one of the few. Hermes Trismegistus's work. He's one of the few initiatory cults of the ancient world that has survived to this day. I mean, you think about just about all of them in the West were either annihilated, or some of them were pushed underground and survived. You know, certain traditions and certain practices, but the alchemical current is one that's survived till today. So to me, it's very precious. It's very close to my heart, and what I feel like I'm here to do. So that's my job, as I see it, is to just um, keep living and breathing it, and to pass it on to the next generation. Um, and certainly here in Australia, there's a lot of people don't realize it, but there's a great history actually of adepts and people who's been doing this work. They often do it in the shadows, and they do it in the quiet. They don't really you know put themselves out into the public like I have. But um, yeah, it's an important part of our culture, and I just hope to be able to pass it on to the next generation.
Well, I'm glad that you are bringing it out into the public. Very much glad for that. And I suppose a question on my lips that might be there as well for a lot of the listeners is, one of the things that stopped me from pursuing education to any depth with alchemy is that I saw it really as a kind of life path, as a something that
Mm,
you don't just skim along the edges. It's something you dive really deeply into and really take on. And something that you were talking to me the other day about is that sometimes practitioners will come and learn certain elements with you, and then incorporate that into their practice, or incorporate
mm,
that into their medicine making, or incorporate that into their lives philosophically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. So
mm.
would love to hear about that, like who's your kind of target audience, and whether people can where people can kind of come in and out of learning.
Yeah, the simple answer is anywhere. I mean, people can uh, as it's said traditionally, you walk into the hermetic labyrinth, and you know, trying to find a way out, you might get lost. But generally speaking, you can always come back the same way you came in, um, and um, and so for some people that means they take a herbal class, and they're like, oh, that's good. That's enough for me. I get lots of herbalists taking the class. A lot of naturopaths. Um, Often it's the ones who they'll say to me the same thing. They'll say, oh, when I first got into studying herbal medicine or studying naturopathy, I was looking for something, and I thought that it was naturopathy or herbalism or whatever, and then I realized very quickly that it wasn't, because I'm a really spiritual person, or I'm really into the mystery of nature, and I'm in, and they're often into, again, all these things we're into, like initiatic traditions, and connecting to the living spirit of the universe. So when they find alchemy, they're like, oh my God, this is what I've been looking for my whole life. That's some people. Some people just come to the class and they're just like, oh, that's great. I can take some of these techniques away and make my herbal products stand out and take them to a whole new level. Now I've got a whole new book of formulas I can try out, and I've upskilled um, my lab work too. Um, at the same time as well, learning this stuff, you're also learning about what's called the parallel process, which is, as you work on things, they work on you. So that's also a part of alchemy, is that there's this parallel process taking place between you and the materia, and that's the initiatory path that alchemy takes you on. So some people don't want to go on that long journey. They come in, they learn a few techniques, and they exit. And some people stay on. So it's herbalists, it's naturopaths, it's I get a lot of people who are really into entheogens as well. People
Mhm.
who've done a lot of that work, um, uh, are into sort of unlocking the hidden potential in plants. Yeah, some people come to it through the esoteric route. Like some people come to classes who are Freemasons or Rosicrucians or ceremonial magicians or Wiccans. A lot of these types of people are often drawn to alchemy as well. Um, yeah. Um, yeah. So it's not, it doesn't have to be something that becomes all consuming or takes over your life. It can just be something that you go to in a pinch. And at a basic level, if you do that herbal class, you come away learning how to create medicines for yourself, for the rest of your life. So uh, a couple of days in the lab really go a long way, with someone
Mm.
who knows what they're doing and can help you through all the practices.
Great. Well, for all of our listeners, I'll put links in the show notes for the Temple of Mercury and um, to Benjamin's offerings, just so you know, you can go down there and have a look. And yeah, the I found it really interesting what you were saying about how your business was birthed during COVID, because that's when my personal business, Alchemilla Herbals, was also birthed during COVID, during lockdown. Very, very interestingly. And yeah, and then also just tying that together, like alchemilla means little alchemist, and it's actually, I got it I got the name from the plant lady's mantle, which is alchemilla genus, alchemilla vulgaris. And they say that the dew that forms on the leaf of the alchemilla plant is like that the alchemists believe that it's a very, very potent, very special dew that collects there on the leaves. And
Hmm.
it holds a lot of magic, and it's always kind of piqued my interest, but I've never really looked into it very much. But it's very
That's very
interesting that we've got
interesting.
that in common.
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
It sort of that sort of ties everything back into what I was saying earlier about you.
Mm.
That universal spirit. We call it the secret fire in alchemy. It's this secret warmth that's permeating through everything and animating it. And so I think I'll have to look into that plant, because certain
Yeah.
plants were considered very special by alchemists, and that's obviously one of them. Lemon
Mm.
balm is another one. Militia
Okay.
officinalis, that's another favored one of alchemists. So that's interesting. I hadn't heard that one.
What are
Um,
some more herbs favored by alchemists? Tell me more.
um, well, I mean, what you tend to do actually in the herbal class is you learn how to make what are called your seven basics. So there's seven herbs, one for each day of the week, and the idea is that you take each herb on the planetary ruler. Day of that herb. So obviously Monday is the day of the moon. You take a moon ruled herb. Like popular ones are like mugwort, blue lotus, things like this. Moon herbs tend to be very psychoactive. They're to do with altered states and moon type things, dreams, visions, divinatory work, psychic work. Tuesday is Mars. So we have the Germanic names obviously in our language because it's a Germanic language we're speaking. So Tuesday comes from that word Tyr. Tyr is the god of war in the Germanic pantheon, so that's Mars. Mars herb, you'd take a Mars herb on the Tuesday. Mars herbs tend to be sometimes associated with the gallbladder. They're like herbs to do with things like nettle, like herbs to do with power and drive and force.
Heat,
Heat,
heat and
yes.
fire. Yeah.
Yeah, iron type things, iron wills. Wednesday
Mm.
is Woden. Odin is Mercury, so that's your Mercury herb day. Often nervous system herbs or relaxant herbs, like things like lavender and fennel. Uh, Thursday is Jupiter. That's Thor. Thor's day is Thursday. Um, Jupiterian herbs. Friday is Freya. Freya's day. You take a Venusian herb on Friday, Venusian tincture. Saturday is, of course, Saturn. Um, Things like mandrake and all these dark path herbs, all the nightshades. Um, no, there's good
Mm.
things in Saturn too. Saturn's all about boundaries and structure. is what it brings. Mullein. And Sunday finally is the day of the sun. That's sun herbs, triumphant, vitality, heart-centered things. So
Calendula.
you make a whole, calendula. You make a whole spade of 7 basic either tinctures or enzas or magistries, and you take them every day. For some, take them for 2 months. Some people say take them for a year, just a few drops a day, to walk you through all the 7 archetypes of the planets. And so I should say that's something else I do in my business too. Is I make and I sell spagyric products, but I generally tend to focus on the mineral and metallic products. So oil of gold is usually the best seller I have. It's an essential oil catalyzed from gold. It's an excellent medicine for vitality and illumination. It A few weeks back, I sent some to a guy who was actually going back to COVID. He was suffering from long COVID still, and couldn't walk more than 50 meters. And oil of gold cured him in 3 days, just a drop a day. So it's a pretty interesting medicine. But I do make some herbal preparations, but I tend to put them into blends with metallic oils and metallic medicines. So people can buy those on the website as well. Got some oil of gold here, actually. The listeners probably can't see, but I'm holding up a vial of gold-colored liquid to Tatiana, and that golden color you can see is the essential oil. So there's no actual gold in the tincture, but the essential oil is in carrier spirit there. So that's the oil of gold.
Wow.
Very special medicine. Goes back to, that's a 7th century recipe, actually. Goes right back to an Arab formula for catalyzing that essential oil from gold.
Wow, that's incredible. Thank you so much for everything that you've shared today. I feel like there's you could spend a lifetime learning about all this stuff, which you clearly are. You're clearly very, very well versed in your work, and yeah, it's wonderful. Hopefully some of our listeners go on to learn from you. I definitely am. You've got my interest. It's great. This is so much of the stuff you're talking about is reminding me of a hyperfixation I had in my teenage years that I really put to the side. And now I wanting to pick that back up and keep learning. So yeah, thank you.
Beautiful.
Thanks for everything that you've shared and for sharing your time. And I hope to see you in person sooner than later.
Yeah, me too. It'd be great. I'd be happy to have you anytime.
Beautiful. We'll have to have you come up once we get our facility set up for the Elder Tree. Have you come up and teach alchemy to people up here.
We'd love to. We'd be happy to come up anytime.
Beautiful. Okay, well, have a beautiful day, and thanks so much for coming on here.
Thanks, Tatiana.
Thank you so much for listening to the Herbal Education segment of the Elder Tree podcast. Stay tuned every new moon as I interview more wise and inspiring herbal educators and herbal lore keepers from around Australia. If you would like to go deeper with the podcast journey, you can become a member of the Elder Tree Trove on Patreon. Contribute as little as $2 per week to access free content from our interviewees and also access discount codes and opportunities which are exclusive to our members. You can find us on Patreon by going to www.patreon.com/The Elder Tree. Other ways that you can assist us in getting our offerings out there to more people in Australia is by subscribing and leaving a review on Apple Podcasts and on the Spotify app. Also, liking, commenting on and sharing our social media posts actually has a really positive impact and helps us to reach further with the message from all of the amazing herbal lore keepers that we interview on this podcast. Thank you so much for your support and have a most wonderful day.
If